Today I want to talk about two things. I want to talk about how God is always in the small stuff along with the big stuff, but I want to hit hard today on this whole idea that God can use evil for good. Let's see how that plays out today. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Encouraging Truth series. Glad you're with us today. For the last few weeks, we have been encouraged each week with the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. And what we've been learning is that no matter what God put into his life, Joseph has been able to rest in the fact that God always has a purpose for where he was leading him and guiding him to. Even if it was good, even if it was bad, even if it was big stuff, but even if it was small stuff. Our encouraging truth number 85 today is this: God is even in the small stuff. And I hope that that's going to encourage you today. We need to look at God as if he's in everything, because he is. Someone sent me an email one time, and I thought this was kind of cute. It was this conversation between God and this man. It's just this reminder that we forget that the little things in life God is still a part of. The man asks this to God: God, can I ask you a question? God says, sure. The man says, why did you let so much bad stuff happen to me today? God says, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I woke up late. God said, yeah. The man said, well, my car took forever to start. God's like, okay. The man says, well, at lunch they made my sandwich wrong and I had to wait. God's like, okay. The man says, on the way home, my phone went dead just as I picked up a call. God's like, okay. The man says, well, on top of it all, I got home and I just wanted to soak my feet in my new foot massager and relax, but it wouldn't work. Nothing went right today. Why did you do that, God? God said, let me tell you what really was going on. He said, first of all, the angel of death was at your bed this morning. I had to send one of my angels to battle him for your life. So I let you sleep through that. The man's like, okay. God says, the reason I didn't let your car start is because I knew that there was a drunk driver on the road, and the route you were taking, he would have hit you. Didn't want that to happen, so I made sure that your car stalled enough until that passed. The man suddenly becomes ashamed of what he was asking God. God said, well then, the first person who made your sandwich today, that person was sick, and I didn't want you to catch what they had, so I knew you couldn't afford to miss a week, so that's why that happened with your sandwich. And then God said your phone went dead because that person that was calling was going to say something that would have gotten you in a lot of trouble. And so I just made sure your phone was shut off. And the man said, all right, God, I get it. And God said, oh, no, let's talk about the foot massager. The foot massager had a short in it. And I knew that if you turned it on and it turned on, it would take all the power out of your house last night. He said, I didn't think you really wanted to be in the dark. And the man said, God, I am so sorry. And God said, don't be sorry. I need you to learn to trust me in all things, in good things and in bad things. And God says, I want you to know that I have a plan for your life. The man said, God, I'm sorry. I'm going to just go back and say thank you for everything that you allowed to happen today. What seemed bad to me was actually probably good. God said to him, well, you're welcome. It was just another day being your God and looking after my children. Now, I thought that was kind of cute to remind us that God is intricately involved in all the little things, but some of you are like, well, my day didn't go like that. My story was kind of the opposite, because I did get hit by the drunk driver. And my foot massager did short out, and all my lights went out. And that sick person did fix my sandwich, and I did get sick. And so you're confused at that, but here's what we need to remember. God is still in it even if it's something bad. And I think that's what we're seeing through the life of Joseph. This just happened last week. Our son Jesse and daughter-in-law Hannah, they had this big trip to Nashville planned. And they were so excited about it, and they're like, okay, we just hope and pray nobody gets sick. Well, 11 days before they were leaving, their daughter, our granddaughter, got COVID. And they're like, oh my gosh, okay, 10 days quarantine, the day she's back in school, the day we get to go to Nashville. Until that didn't happen, because 4 days before they're getting ready to leave, Hannah, our daughter-in-law, got COVID and the trip was canceled. When they told me about it, my first response was, oh my gosh, God must have had a really good reason for you not to be going to Nashville. I don't know what it is, and I don't think anyone will know until we get to heaven, and by that time it's not really going to matter. But we have to get to the point where we say, God, I'm trusting you that you know something that I don't know. See, it made me think how different our lives would be if we really honestly added God into every single equation in our life, every moment. Our life would be so much more peaceful. So picking up our story with Joseph, of course, Joseph was hated by his brothers. He was sold by traders, on their way to Egypt. Joseph has since now been sold into slavery, falsely accused of rape, thrown into prison, even though he was innocent. Finally, it's been about 14 years after his brothers sold him to the traders. And Joseph's life, as we saw last week, is just getting ready to change in a huge way, and a new season, finally, after all the waiting, is going to happen. The question I want to ask is this. If you had a past like Joseph, and I'm assuming that some of you did, some of you have been deeply hurt by your family. Some of you have been unjustly accused. Some of you have been forgotten by people who you helped. Like, what would you do? What kind of an attitude would you have? Maybe for some of you, your husband walked out because he found a younger woman. Maybe you were sexually abused as a child. Maybe your parents were alcoholics and you spent your life being completely embarrassed by them. Maybe your mom died of cancer when you were a child and your dad wasn't really that great of a dad. You have a choice. And that's what we learned from Joseph. He had a choice. And you have a choice on what you're going to do with your past, your devastating childhood, your ex-husband, the family members who hurt you. And we're learning from Joseph what we should be doing. And that is trusting God to use the bad things in your life for good. So picking up our story, Pharaoh has a weird dream. Cupbearer, who was in prison with Joseph for a little while, is now working for Pharaoh. Suddenly he remembers that Joseph can interpret dreams. Joseph is called to Pharaoh. Joseph let Pharaoh know, we saw this last week, that his dream was from God. And Joseph goes on to explain to Pharaoh that this dream you had, Pharaoh, means that Egypt will have 7 years of plenty. And then there's going to be 7 years of famine. And Egypt would be in a lot of trouble. So this is Pharaoh's response for chapter 41, verse 38. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it in Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put the gold necklace around his neck. He had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, bow the knee. And he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphenath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from his presence of Pharaoh and went through all of the land of Egypt. I want you to imagine the scene. In one day, everything in Joseph's life changed. In one day, he went from filthy, dirty, long matted hair, prisoner, overseeing prisoners, living in a dungeon, prison clothes, lonely, unshaven, frustrated, to Pharaoh's right-hand man. He has a new signet ring. He has new clothes, jewelry, a chariot, a new wife. Joseph went from a season of suffering to now a season of plenty. Here is the key. Always remember that our past, which for many of you were filled with suffering, can bring you into a season of plenty. It can if you wait. You have to wait for it though. Because in this season of plenty, you won't have the pain from the past. Because you'll have reconciled that with God. And you'll be able to move on and say, I see now why my past was like that. So now I can serve God in a great, grand new way. I think it's all about our perspective on past pain. Because like I said before, Joseph could have been bitter and hateful and angry and sat around and felt sorry for himself. But instead, he added God into everything in his life. Even the day-to-day small stuff in helping people and paying attention to the baker and the cupbearer and being kind to them, because the day-to-day stuff is what brought Joseph to the place he was today. So the first 7 years, Joseph worked diligently to store up as much food as he could in Egypt in preparation for this famine. But think what he could have done. He could have sat in prison and been so bitter and so angry that the first thing he could have done is say, hey, Mr. Pharaoh, can I take a little leave of absence? I have some family business to take care of back in Israel. But since he added God into his equation, into his situation, he realized that what his family did to him over 15 years before was all part of God's plan, overarching plan for his life. Joseph realized he didn't need to take care of anything because he knew that God would do that for him. Maybe for you, it's this painful divorce that you can't get over. Perhaps someone stole from you or lied to you. Possibly someone didn't meet your expectations and you've never ever forgiven them. We need to learn a lesson from Joseph and we need to change our perspective. God allowed his brothers to do what they did in order to get Joseph to the position that God needed him to be in. And God allowed all the bad situations to happen. And the same thing happens to you and I. All of our days, there's going to be big stuff, there's going to be little stuff. But we have to put God in that equation and say, God, I don't know why even the little stuff is happening, but God, I'm trusting you. I know you're doing something. Psalms 139:16 says this, your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was none, was not one of them. God says, before you were born, I knew every day. He knows what day it is for you today. You may have to wait another 5 years. You may have to wait another 5 minutes. I don't know. But God says, I got this. Relax. Just take one day at a time. See, if we can take this serious, then we can forgive the people in our past that hurt us. Because all of our days have been ordained by God. Just like Joseph, he allowed the hurt and pain. He allowed God to use him and use the pain to get him to the place he needed to be. Which tells me that God can use something that someone meant for evil against you, and God can turn it into something good. The painful divorce, God can turn to good. The loss of your job, God can turn to good. I get it, that it feels devastating, but here's what I think. Knowing God is in the good and the bad should change how we react. See, there's this weird thing out there that's always saying, well, the devil's doing this to me. I don't know. Maybe God's just moving you to a different place and he's using bad circumstances to do it. So for Joseph, he's now 37. There's been 7 years of plenty, and Joseph stored all the grain up. Now the 7 years of famine starts. But the famine hits Egypt, but it also hits Israel or Canaan, where Joseph's family is. The scene shifts over now in the Bible to where Joseph's dad and his brothers are living. There's no food. And I wonder if Joseph, being in Egypt, secretly wonders if his brothers would show up. I wonder if he stared down the road looking for them. Are they going to come for food to Egypt? Genesis 42:1 says this. Now Jacob, Joseph's dad, saw that there was grain in Egypt, and Jacob said to his sons, "Why are you staring at one another?" He said, "Behold, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 brothers of Joseph went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brothers Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, "I'm afraid that harm may befall him." So the sons of Israel came to buy grain among those who were coming for the famine was in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the ruler of the land. He was the one who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. Imagine this scene. Imagine the scene as his brothers show up and bow down before Joseph. Because remember the dream that Joseph had, the dream that made the brothers so angry. Joseph said, "I had a dream that all my family would bow down to me." They thought he was crazy. He probably thought he was crazy. But suddenly, that dream came to fruition. And now Joseph is confronted with the men who sold him into slavery 20 years before. That's a hard place to be. It's that moment when you see that person who hurt you after so many years. Maybe you run into them at the mall, okay? Maybe you have to see them at, your kid's wedding. You know when you see that person how Joseph must have felt. But imagine this moment that he saw his family. I think about the questions he probably wanted to ask, like, "Oh my gosh, you guys, where's Dad? How's Benjamin?" But what's interesting is Joseph didn't do that. He never made himself known to his brothers at all. For all they knew, they were bowing down to an Egyptian. Joseph was dressed like an Egyptian. He talked like an Egyptian. He used their language. He looked just like, he was Pharaoh's right-hand man. Not in their wildest dreams would they ever associate Joseph, their brother, as Pharaoh's guy. So what Joseph did is he tests his brothers. He wants to test them to see if over these last 20 years they had changed. Because remember, the last time he saw his brothers, they were liars, they were manipulators, they covered up Joseph's death, they lied to the dad and said that, hey, Joseph's dead. So Joseph wants to know that his baby brother Benjamin is okay. So Joseph says, "Bring Benjamin to me." So the brothers know that Jacob, their dad, is not going to let Benjamin come to Egypt. So they're trying to converse and talk about what to do. So they're doing this in front of Joseph. But Joseph speaks Egyptian. They don't know that he also speaks Hebrew. And Joseph understood every single word his brothers were saying. Look at Genesis 42:21. Then they said to one another, "Truly we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us, yet we would not listen. Therefore this distress has come upon us." These guys are talking about Joseph. Joseph is listening to it because he realizes that these brothers have been haunted all of these years by what they did to him. Reuben answered them, saying, "Did I not tell you, do not sin against the boy? And you would not listen? Now comes the reckoning for his blood." They did not know, however, that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between them. Isn't this amazing? Like what they did in their past never left them. They remembered how Joseph pled with them for his life. They recognized that their past was coming back. They were understanding that they were now reaping what they sowed. And for 20 years, Joseph could see that they never forgot this time. See, for sometimes reaping happens immediately. And yet sometimes, like Joseph's life, It took years and years for the final outcome. So please just let that encourage you today, that so many of you have people who've hurt you, and you've just waited for, like, get them, God. Okay, sometimes God doesn't get them for a long time, and we need to be okay with that. For Joseph, it's been, get him, God, for 20 years, if in fact he ever thought that way. And it's been 20 years, and God is about ready to step in. So, Joseph tests his brothers. And after a few tests, his brothers came through with flying colors. Joseph realizes now that his brothers were humble and repentant, changed men. And he decides to reveal who he really is. Genesis 45:1 says, Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood before him. And he cried, Have everyone go from me. So there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard of it. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, Please come closer to me. And they came closer, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or angry with yourself, because you sold me here. Why? For God sent me before you to preserve life. For this famine has been in the land these last 2 years. There are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of his household and ruler over all the land of Egypt. That is a really, really great perspective. Joseph was able to look at his life and recognize God at the center of his last 20 years. He understood that even his brothers' hatred of him was part of God's plan to save Israel and Egypt. I want you to think how different our lives would be if we really could take God at his word and see God present in all of these situations, even the bad ones, even the small stuff. So Pharaoh let Joseph bring his father and family to Egypt. He gave them a really good land. Joseph was able to spend 17 years with his dad before his dad died. And when his dad died, his brothers were terrified. And they were fearful that because they didn't know was Joseph being nice to them until dad died? But here's what Joseph said in Genesis 50, verse 19. Joseph said to them, Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result to preserve many people alive. So therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones. So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Remember this, what someone meant evil against you, God can use for good. But here's the question. Will you let him? Will you continue to harbor bitterness and anger and all those things? Or will you let God use your past for good? Illustrated like this. You're so angry with that boyfriend in high school. He got you pregnant and then he made you have an abortion. And now, 30 years later, you can't get over it. And I'm saying to you, yes, you can. What he meant as evil, God can use for good. Go work with the Crisis Pregnancy Center. Go help girls that are thinking of having abortions. Like, go do something with your past. Were you a drug addict? Were you a prostitute? Were you an alcoholic? Like, whatever it is, get involved in a ministry to go help others out of where you used to be. Did your husband have an affair and leave you? Well, I don't know. Start a ministry, a compassion ministry, to help women learn how to get through their unforgiveness and bitterness. See, here's what we need to know. No matter what has come into our life, whether it's the big stuff or the little stuff, whether it's the good stuff or the bad stuff, wake up each morning and add God into your life. And then when you go to bed at night, thank him. And relax knowing that we serve a really awesome big God that can take evil and use it for good. Here's what we need to know. There is something comforting about 1 billion stars held steady by God who knows what he's doing. Encouraging truth number 85 is this: God is even in the small stuff. Hope that helps you today. Have a good day.